this morning, the Queen attending this state funeral. And, we need to keep not just all the members of the royal family safe, the procession safe, all these soldiers, all these guards, all the religious leaders, but also the public needs to be safe as well. So, this is a humongous operation, and this is the thing as well, what people don't realize, this occasion would have had years in the planning, maybe even decades. It's well known that all the broadcasters in the United Kingdom all rehearse the Queen's death every year, but actually plans for Operation London Bridge to the T would have had to have been in place probably decades before this moment, ready to be activated at a moment's notice. And that's the thing, as soon as those words, London Bridge is down, were said over the phone to the Prime Minister, there is a series of operations that would then be activated, and everything would have to be there ready to do so.
Just speaking of security, on that point, there was some type of snafu over the weekend where you saw some individual who was arrested, essentially storm but get tackled and lunge forward at Westminster Hall. Do we have any more details on that? We know an arrest has been made, but that no doubt sent some shivers down people's spine.
Yeah, absolutely. But, the reports that I've heard as well was apparently this lunger, so to speak, didn't make friends in the queue. And that's a big sign. He was very much a solitary figure. I think people are worried about his welfare overall as well. And I was actually in Westminster Hall at the time. I queued up for 10.5 hours to see the Queen lying in state. And just as I was leaving Westminster Hall, I saw a figure being arrested by police officers at the other end, and it could well have been that figure as well. But I would say mostly that there haven't, apart from that, there haven't been any major mess ups at all or anything. As far as we can tell, the public has been very respectful. The public appreciates the absolute magnitude of this moment. The public overall, especially with the queue, the public have been queuing overnight. Some queues have gone up to 22, maybe even 24 hours at some point to see the Queen lying in state. But actually, I would say the atmosphere in that queue was, I wouldn't say euphoric because it is a very solemn occasion, but everybody was there and was excited to be a part of history, and also was not excited, but everyone was there very keen to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. And I'll say, if you forgive me for a moment, I'll talk a bit about what went on at Westminster Hall. Because at the same time, when you entered into that hall, yes, you're at the epicenter of this constitutional monarchy, of this parliamentary democracy. You're in this place which has so much history when it comes to both the monarchy and also political history as well. But then at the same time, you could hear a pin drop. The hall was silent, and you are there in your thoughts. It's also an incredibly powerful and personal moment as well.
Yeah, Josh, we're going to listen into some more of the sounds still, though. We were just watching some of the cannon and the gunfire there. And then we're going to bring you back in. We're going to bring Gabby Amato back in. But just for some of our viewers who might be waking up on the West Coast, who might be going to work on the East Coast, and who have been watching this along with us, let's just watch and listen. Okay, we're at the bottom of the hour now. We are just watching the incredible sights here right outside of the Wellington Arch in London, and it seems that the Queen's casket has come to a stop. We're watching more and more members of the royal family step up and walk up to join the Queen's children and some of the Queen's grandchildren. I'm being joined right now by Live Now's own Gabby Amato in Orlando as well. And Gabby, we have been watching some incredible scenes the last several hours, history in the making, and so this is not over yet. We have a lot more to see, a lot of more remembrances still by members of the royal family. What can we have in store, and how did we get here today? It's been a long 10 days, but it's been a very solemn 10 days.
It really has. Today is the culmination of the past 10 days where the United Kingdom and really the world has been in mourning. One final goodbye today for the longest reigning monarch in British history, Queen Elizabeth II. And there you see her coffin has made its way to the Wellington Arch. Now it will be transferred to a hearse. The bearer party will lift the Queen's coffin from that state gun carriage and place it in the state hearse. The state hearse will then depart on its journey to Windsor as this procession does officially end. Of course, the royal family and the close members of this family will make their way to Windsor Castle for that private ceremony later on today. But as you said, Andy, it really has been a week full of momentous occasions. As we know, Queen Elizabeth II passed away at her Balmoral Castle in Scotland. This has been a journey to get her from Balmoral to the Scottish capital, Edinburgh. We saw that gorgeous procession through the streets and villages of Scotland, where the streets were lined with thousands upon thousands of mourners as Queen Elizabeth made her voyage out of that country. She, of course, landed in London. We saw her return to Buckingham Palace, and there you are seeing there on your screens Prince George and Prince Charlotte, who are in attendance at their grandmother's funeral here. But this has been a really long week. King Charles III assuming the throne, visiting all 4 countries in the United Kingdom. And now we are seeing the moment where Queen Elizabeth II's coffin is taken off of that state carriage and transferred onto the hearse. We'll listen in now so we all take in this moment.
Okay, and there you have it. The hearse now on its way to Windsor Castle. We're going to bring in yet again Gabby Amato, Josh Rahm, as we continue to follow this huge story today and a very, very solemn ritual. You've been seeing really the military ritual going through Wellington Arch there. And so we're going to keep this up. I have Josh and Gabby with us. Josh, first with you, though, what's the significance? How much does Windsor Castle mean to the royal family?
Well, Windsor is sort of intrinsic to the royal identity. It's well known during World War II, when she was younger, during the early stages, that Her Majesty the Queen, then Princess Elizabeth, and her young sister at the time, Princess Margaret, were evacuated to Windsor Park during World War II. Their mother and father opted to stay in London at Buckingham Palace, and actually during the wartime, Buckingham Palace was then bombed, and Her Majesty the Queen Mother, who was then Queen at the time, said, "Great, now I can look the East End in its face. I'm glad." But Windsor has been intrinsic to the royal identity. That is more where the Queen calls home. She uses Buckingham Palace more as an office, as a working office, where receptions are where receptions take place, where duties are carried out, ceremonial duties. Before the state opening of Parliament, she will depart from Buckingham Palace over to the Palace of Westminster, to the Houses of Parliament, to deliver what's known as the Queen's Speech. But there again, what you're seeing now, if we're looking at the pictures, we're seeing the Queen's coffin. On top, you can see the orb and the scepter, as well as the imperial state crown, one of the two crowns of the coronation. We're seeing them on top of the coffin, and that's on top of the royal standard, which is the monarch's personal flag as well. But that hearse was actually partly designed by Her Majesty the Queen, specifically so as many people could see this exact site that we're watching now as possible. We are seeing history unfolding. This is history unfolding right before our eyes. Notice the slow speed that the motorcade is driving. They are going to be making their way over to Windsor at 12 miles per hour. This is to make sure that as many members of the public along the route will be able to catch a glimpse as possible. We're already seeing, just like when the Princess of Wales, the late Princess of Wales, Diana, passed away, and we saw people throwing flowers at the hearse. We're already seeing some flowers being thrown at the hearse in tribute of Her Majesty the Queen. You know, we're seeing these huge crowds lining the streets, and as well, we mentioned the security. Notice not just the police officers at front and behind the motorcade, we're also seeing the Metropolitan Police line the complete route all the way through. We're seeing flowers being thrown onto the roads as well, lining the route as well, people paying tribute. This is history unfolding before our eyes.
Yeah, we were being told, I was seeing some reports that police had told some of the mourners and the well-wishers not to throw flowers at the hearse itself, but of course not being heeded.
Well, yes, but I also think this is partly due to concerns with the amount of flowers actually that would be throne as well. We saw with Princess Diana's, the car nearly came to a stand with her funeral. The car nearly came to a standstill as thousands of flowers were being thrown at this vehicle. So that is it's not a message to the public of you can't do this, you can't pay tributes. It's more of a case of this is needed for logistical purposes. We need a very clear right of way. We need a very clear path logistically so the hearse can get to Windsor on time as well. You know, this funeral has been planned to the T to specific timings. The time of the committal service that is due to take place in Windsor. The coffin is due to make its way along the long walk to St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle at 3:10 UK time. It's currently nearly 1:45 UK time. So, you know, there needs to be a clear route and a clear right of way, and there needs to be a lack of obstacle.
Sure. Gabby.
So yes, this is history unfolding in front of our eyes.
It certainly is, Josh. And I wanted to ask you if you found it at all surprising how emotional we are seeing King Charles III being. Obviously, we have seen these members of the royal family be quite stoic in the public eye, but we've seen him now teary-eyed throughout the morning. Obviously, he is quite literally mourning his mother, but are you at all surprised by the emotion that we're seeing in the king?
No, absolutely not. I'm not surprised at all. It's very well known that he was very personally close with his mother. We've seen at various stages throughout the last 10 days, His Majesty the King express emotion. You know, in his first public address, that televised speech, he took a very human approach as well, a very relatable approach. You know, it's not surprise, but also at the same time, I think the public can resonate with that. You know, he is carrying not just the burden of history and the burden of the crown, the monarchy, the family institution on his shoulders. He's also carrying almost the weight of the grief of the entire country on his shoulders as well. This is such a huge moment, and he is at the epicenter of it. What I will say is, I think, you know, we're still, but also at the same time, we're still seeing him undertake tradition as well. You know, we saw him give the salute at Wellington Arch as the coffin was starting to drive off and make its first I would say steps, but first movements towards Windsor Park. So, you know, we're still seeing that sense of duty. We are seeing that stoicism, but you can see the grief etched on his face. It's a very poignant moment, but it's also, think about it, even though, yes, he's king, he's just lost his mother. This is a very personal moment for all of the royal family as well. And another poignant moment, which I want to touch upon, is, you know, we're seeing Princess Charlotte and Prince George stand next to their mother and father, the Prince and Princess of Wales. They are both under 10 years of age. You know, this is such a huge moment for them, for their family, and this is a moment that is going to be written into the history books.
You know, Josh, how long would you say it takes to get to Windsor Castle? To give us a sense, I mean, we're really getting kind of a tour guide around London for those who might not have been, for those who have been. You're seeing really the sights.
I just want to mention the fact that the royal hearse is driving now past the Royal Albert Hall. That is obviously a huge, significant cultural landmark in London, where the Queen and the royal family have made various appearances, various iconic appearances over the years. A lot of the huge film premieres and the royal performances are held at the Royal Albert Hall. The BAFTA Film Awards are held at the Royal Albert Hall every year, and at least a member of the royal family attends that. So I just wanted to pick up on that. I would say from London, around an hour, usually it would take to get to Windsor. But saying that, this hearse, even though, yes, there's not going to be any sort of traffic, so to speak, because the roads are cleared, the roads have been closed to make way for this procession and this motorcade that we're watching now. But this hearse is driving at 12 miles an hour. So this is going to be a very slow journey to Windsor. I think they're currently due to arrive in Windsor. I think the time that they're due to arrive is around 10 past 3 UK time. It's currently 10 to 2 UK time. So probably around an hour and 20 minutes from now, they are due to arrive in Westminster for the committal service at St George's Chapel to take place at 4 p.m.
Yeah, and of course, we just saw as well the Albert and Victoria Monument right across the street from the Royal Albert Hall. Of course, that was the last time the UK mourned the loss of a queen, Queen Victoria, who is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Queen's great-great-grandmother. And so right now we can also see some of the procession as well. You know, Josh, and maybe Gabby can also chime in here. I've been curious as well. What happens tomorrow when the crowds go home, when, you know, the mourning may not be over. It is still going to be in the hearts and minds of so many. But the country is irrevocably changed. There's a new prime minister. There's a new king. Does life go back?
I think the fact of the matter is life will go back. That is, and also that is what Her Majesty would have wanted. She would have wanted nothing but the continuation of constitutional duties, the continuation of the running of this country. Yes, although she was very respectful around royal pomp, circumstance, tradition, that was integral to the royal family. You know, Her Majesty the Queen cared about the nation and would want this country and the running of the country to go back to normal. I think the royal family themselves are due to undertake an extra week of mourning. That is for the royal family. We're now seeing a shot of Windsor Castle. The guards there going to be standing there for over an hour in preparation of the coffin's arrival. We're seeing there the flowers as well that have been laid on the grounds. Now, very interestingly as well, all the flowers and cards and tributes that have been laid at the front of Windsor Castle by mourners have been moved specifically to be placed there. That's a very beautiful tribute. But yes, I think the country will go back to, at least, I mean, listen, the country is still going to be reeling after this incredible loss. And, you know, this country will also be entering into a period of transition where the King's new profile is going to be drawn, and he and His Majesty will start appearing on stamps, will start appearing on notes, will start appearing on coins, all the legal tender, post boxes, phone boxes, letter boxes will all need to be changed to include the King's insignia on. Instead of ER, it will turn into CR. But, you know, that will all be done through a period of transition. But in terms of political standing, you know, before the Queen passed away, this country was going through a very politically turbulent period. We're undergoing a cost of living crisis, and the Queen would want that to get sorted. The Queen, Her Majesty, would want the continuation of the running of the country, so that will continue.
And of course, the big question, Josh, is when is the coronation going to officially be? We do know that it is going to be next year at some point, but is there perhaps a more concise timetable? And then my follow-up question to you would also be, what is King Charles III's legacy going to be? What is he going to look to continue from his mother? Obviously, he has been waiting in the wings for 70 years. It's quite some time to prepare for this position. What is his legacy going to ultimately shape up to be, do you think?
Well, first and foremost, what was the first question? The coronation, yes. So the coronation, I think, is due to take place around a year from now. I don't think there's a precise timetable that's been drawn up, or if it has been drawn up, it hasn't been revealed to the public in full, in detail as of yet. I expect those plans will be drawn up over the next couple of months and will be announced in due course. We know that Queen Elizabeth was crowned roughly a year after the death of her father, King George VI, after she ascended the throne. So we're not going to see the coronation for a little while, for at least a year, I would think. Now, in terms of his legacy, I mean, that is yet to be determined. I know what he would probably want, and that would be, he would want to be seen as as a brilliant continuation of doing the job that his mother started and his mother finished for herself, but he would want to carry that on. He would want to be seen as the king to safely and sustainably carry on the monarchy for future generations to come, to be a stabilizing force. He would want to continue on. And what we're seeing so far, we're seeing that same sense of continuation to duty, that same sense of service to the monarchy, the family institution, and the country. You know, I think in terms of his legacy for these opening days has been nothing short of superb. His opening addresses have been personal, emotional, human, relatable, but at the same time stoic. And again, I have to emphasize that same sense of continuation, that same sense of duty. King Charles would want to carry that on, and I think that would want to be his legacy. And I think the country wants to see at least a silver jubilee from Charles. That's what we're hoping for.
Oh.
Whether we'll get it is another story. You know, his queen lived to 106. His grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen Mother, lived to 101. So we may see this, but again, I think the legacy that Charles would want would be the solid continuation of the monarchy.
Yeah, of course, Josh, that's going to be interesting to see how either, you know, if the monarchy changes, if it modernizes, if, like Gabby has been, you know, saying, reporting, if it is scaled back, if the purse strings are tightened a little bit, if you will. You know, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to sound insensitive, but we know there are critics of the monarchy. There are people who think it is an outdated, antiquated institution. And some critics of this entire 10-day period of mourning have thought that it's a little overwrought, it's a little much, it's long, and the country has, like you said, severe problems, inflation, gas prices, energy prices going into the winter. And yet that's juxtaposed with so many people stopping their everyday lives, coming out to pay their respects. And so I find those two you know, contradictory things happening at the same time to be quite something.
Yeah, but we also know that Prime Minister Liz Truss has also held multiple audiences with the King already, and we know that is going to be top of the agenda. You know, we're entering into a new era of Britain. We're exiting the Elizabethan era, and we're entering into the new era of King Charles III. But what's very noticeable is within a week, you know, the Queen, there was the outgoing of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and then she welcomed in Liz Truss to that office. And then within 2 days of that, Her Majesty sadly passed away. So what we have within Liz Truss's first week of office, there is a new Prime Minister and a new monarch, both in the first week. So this is going to be a very pressurized job for both of them. And yes, the country does need to run, but you made a very good point as well. Like, yes, some people have said this week has been very long, very wrought out, but also at the same time, you look at the million or so, maybe even more. Some people are even estimating 2 million people have queued up to see the Queen.
Wow.
Lying in state, bearing in mind we are a country of about 60 million here. So you know that is still quite, if you think about it, a significant portion of the population in itself to go and see the Queen lying in state. So there are millions of people that have very much stuck to this mourning period, have wanted to stick to this mourning period. And, you know, personally, I mean, I can only talk for myself here and excuse my self-indulgence, but I know for the moment, I don't want to listen to fast music at the moment. For all my broadcasts, I've been in a black tie, and I've been when I haven't been broadcasting, I've been wearing either black or grey clothing as well. When I went to see Her Majesty lying in state, I wore a grey jacket and black clothing underneath, and a lot of other people in this country have been doing the same thing. You know, I went to an engagement party, excuse the self-indulgence again, I went to an engagement party last night, but a lot of people were wearing wearing the colours of mourning. We're wearing darks, blacks and greys. A lot of people, the feeling in this country at the moment is people are reeling from the loss of this monarch. People universally love the Queen. And that's also the funniest, not the funniest thing, but that's also a very interesting thing. There are also people who say, you know, I might not be the biggest fan of the royal family, but I greatly admired Her Majesty the Queen, and I want to pay my respects and pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. And this is the thing, the Queen was an intrinsic part of the fabric of the United Kingdom, a fabric of our society. You know, we will never see a monarch like this again. We will never see an event like this again. This is, I think, the biggest news event that I will probably have in my lifetime. So, you know, the magnitude of this moment cannot be overstated, and people have been very much respectful of that.
Okay, we just want to, you know, keep with this. Of course, Josh, we're going to keep you on. Gabby, we're going to keep you on. In about 3 minutes at the top of the hour, though, we are going to be getting a live report from one of our intrepid reporters out there who's been there since this all began, Fox's Lauren Blanchard. We're going to be speaking with her in London at the top of the hour. Before we do that, we're just going to watch some of these scenes as we approach the top of the hour in continuing coverage of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. The processional hearse, the caravan here is driving right now to Windsor Castle, and we'll stay with this shot right here. Okay, we are still watching the aerial pictures overhead, and you can just see countless people lined up to catch a glimpse of the hearse there as it makes its way to Windsor Castle. Joining us now live from London is Fox News correspondent Lauren Blanchard. And Lauren, you have been here since the very beginning, since news of the Queen's death was announced, and now 10 days later, the funeral took place this morning. It was a gorgeous, beautiful ceremony. Your thoughts?
Well, Andrew, this entire thing has been so meticulously planned. I mean, down to the minute when Big Ben and the guns would fire off every single minute of that procession. And it was a really somber day today. We have been obviously out and about talking to folks as they stood in line in the queue, as it became to be called. And there was a little bit of lightness over the last week. Obviously, a lot of memories of the late Queen, but today was really about the final farewell. We see almost 1 million people that line the streets of London just hoping to have that one last glimpse as her coffin left Westminster Abbey after her state funeral for the last time. It is now, as we have been watching, on its way from London to Windsor. So many people lining that entire route along the highway, along the streets, hoping just to get one last look as we see her coffin in the hearse now. Heads towards St. George's Chapel. There will be a commitment ceremony there a little bit later on this afternoon for a smaller crowd. Only 800 people have been invited to this one. The state funeral, about 2,000. Many heads of state, including President Biden and the First Lady, were at that. But now it is starting to get smaller, a bit more intimate. And then tonight will be the actual burial. She'll be buried alongside her late husband, Prince Philip, and her mom, her dad, and the ashes of her sister. So it has been a very somber day. We have, Andrew, heard some cheering, some applause as the hearse has driven by. I feel just because so many people have been reflecting on her life, the Queen's life, and her legacy over the last week, and this really is the last goodbye for them, the final thank you, the final farewell.
Yeah, Lauren, we've been speaking to some of our experts, some of our reporters about, what is tomorrow going to look like? But you have been there for the duration. We spoke with you and got your experience waiting in the queue, going into Westminster Hall to see the coffin up close. What does London look like right now? Have the crowds dissipated around Westminster Hall? They're lining the streets, but there is a sense of quiet. It's almost eerie.
So believe it or not, even near Westminster Hall, there are still crowds, even though the Queen, the coffin, has not been in that area for more than an hour. Faintly in the back, I can hear some church bells. I believe it's Westminster Abbey is tolling, sounding right now, just a little bit of a lightheartedness now that she is on her way to her final resting place. People really coming together, and we've seen that, Andrew, over the last week and a half. This is such a bonding experience, not only for folks here in London and Great Britain, but there are so many people who have come into the town. About 1 million is what they were estimating for today. And this is just a moment of camaraderie, of remembrance, reflection, and pride. Honestly, so many have been very proud to be able to stand out there, wait hours and hours for this moment to say goodbye. And they are proud they were able to do this for their late Queen, who they say gave so much of herself, her life to service, that this was the least they could do.
All right, Fox's Lauren Blanchard there live for us in London, reporting on this historic day, yet solemn day. Lauren, we appreciate your reporting, and we'll talk again.
Thank you.
Okay, we were so fortunate to be able to speak with Lauren Blanchard and Madeline Rivera throughout the duration of this 10 days of mourning, and today specifically on the funeral itself. We're going to be continuing to show you all of these live pictures as the Queen's hearse travels to Windsor Castle. Of course, just about a year and a half ago, April 2021, we were doing the exact same thing here at Live Now from Fox for the funeral of Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. It was so scaled back because of all of the COVID restrictions. And of course, now it looks very, very different as thousands, millions, to what Lauren Blanchard was saying, have come out for the past several days. Let's go out live still yet again. We have Josh Rahm on the phone, or via Zoom, I should say, as well. And Josh, thank you so much for staying with us. I know this is a big time commitment today, but this is a historic day, and we appreciate you being alongside us. But we're coming up a little after 2 o'clock there in London. The royal family and so many Britons, they still have a long day cut out for them, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see the crowds. We're seeing these pictures now of these crowds. We're seeing, I would say, millions of people lining the streets along London and along this long route to Windsor to catch even a glimpse of Her Majesty the Queen in this state hearse, partially designed by herself, driving from Wellington Arch to what will be her final resting place in Windsor Castle, in the royal vault underneath St George's Chapel, where she will be reunited with her mother, her father, her beloved sister, Princess Margaret, as well as her husband, late husband, I should say, Prince Philip. And you mentioned there Prince Philip's funeral, how it had to be drastically scaled back due to COVID restrictions at the time. But that's also the thing now. We're seeing millions of people lining the streets very close together. We're seeing crowds in their hundreds of thousands wanting to pay their respects and pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen today.
You know, I just want to talk, and we have some time now, Josh. Let's talk about the legacy, the history, how this was really thrust upon a young Elizabeth Windsor back in her mid-20s when, all these things had to either, how you look at it, go rightly or go wrongly. Her uncle, Edward VIII, abdicated for, a love interest, an American woman. And his brother, her father, accedes to the throne and steps in and then dies early and young. And so, I wouldn't say she asked for this, but she rose to the occasion over the course of 70 years. And this is really the culmination of what we're seeing today. But it's so interesting how history, how fate works its magic.
Well, they do say the crown always finds itself onto the right head. And I would argue that it wasn't even thrust upon her when she was in her 20s, when her father sadly passed away, the late King George VI. I would say it was actually thrust upon her as a child, as soon as her uncle Edward VIII signed his notice of abdication. You know, her father cried for an hour on the shoulder of his mother, the late Queen Mary, because he knew the burden of responsibility, not just for himself, but also for his eldest daughter, the then young Princess Elizabeth. You know, as soon as the abdication took place, as soon as that was signed, you know, the burden of the crown, the monarchy, fell onto this family's shoulders. And that can't be understated, but that's the thing. Her Majesty the Queen, for 70 years, she had to rise to the occasion. But the thing I spoke about this beforehand, on her 21st birthday, she made a speech where she said, "Whether my life be long or short, be devoted to you, to the people, to the Commonwealth, to the United Kingdom." She made a promise on the day of her coronation, a solemn promise to be devoted to the service of the people of the United Kingdom. And up until her dying days, she fulfilled that promise. Even 2 days before she sadly passed away at the age of 96, she welcomed the next Prime Minister, Liz Truss, in Balmoral. That was one of her last constitutional duties that she carried out. And I've been hearing, actually, you know, doctors, the next day she cancelled a Privy Council meeting, which was virtual. But doctors were apparently recommending that she rested on the day. But no, she was determined to fulfill her large constitutional duties and continue the running of the country and continue the legacy of this great nation. That is what she wanted to do. You know, it was thrust upon her at a young age, but she also had the perfect first mentor to help her through her early years as monarch, Sir Winston Churchill. Some would argue the greatest ever Brit. Now, with Her Majesty's passing, I think Sir Winston Churchill might be the second greatest Brit. I think that our greatest Brit has been Elizabeth II. Some are calling her Elizabeth the Great. Others are calling her Elizabeth the Devoted, because for 70 years she promised to serve the people of this country with utter devotion, and boy, did she do just that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, history gives those monikers to, you know, late monarchs, you know, not only in the UK, but all over. And so it will be interesting to see if historians do, you know, bestow such a moniker on her. You know, we have two Joshes with us. Josh Rahm, we're being joined by Josh Breslow right now. But before we get to both of you, I just want to kind of give our viewers a roundup of all of these scenes that we have in front of us right now. And you can see, I believe, this feed right here is at St. George's Chapel. Yes, yes. And so people are seated there. This was a scaled down version, 800 people. To, you know, compare with the 2,000 that were at Westminster Abbey. So, Josh, help us along here. If you see anyone, we're going to point some of these people out, some of these familiar faces. Also, a live now look outside of Buckingham Palace, where we just saw, about 30 minutes ago, the Queen being pulled by those 98 sailors, her coffin on the gun carriage. For one final time. We also have this live now look as well, as we have been seeing countless world leaders who attended the funeral services come and pay their respects yet again and sign a condolence book. So we have those. And then, of course, overhead, these aerial pictures of the hearse itself making its way to Windsor Castle, and then at Windsor Castle itself, where we're going to stay here as we await what is going to be known, or what is known as this committal service, if you will, and that is the name of this next kind of major event on the itinerary of today, as the country and the world mourns the loss of Queen Elizabeth II, and look at just how many people are out there on the road into Windsor, and the sea of bouquets of flowers, Josh. It was just going for miles, and you said they kind of bring that there from Buckingham Palace. That's kind of the protocol there. But
I think in Windsor, they because Windsor, as I said before, is obviously known as is intrinsic to the royal identity, so to speak, and we're actually seeing now the start of some of the processions on the long walk in the Windsor Park estate, which leads up to Windsor Castle. This mile walk there, you can see the scenes, and we see the crowds in Windsor gathering, ready to catch a glimpse of the coffin as it heads to its final resting place. So I would actually like to comment on something, because I've had a lot of comments on by actually American viewers who have commented to me we saw this huge not dumping, but this huge gathering of flowers outside Buckingham Palace for Princess Diana when she passed away. Why hasn't that been done this time for the Queen? And actually, there's a very good reason for that, and that's because every 12 hours, the flowers that are laid by mourners outside of Buckingham Palace are actually moved over to Green Park. And actually, that in Green Park is where you could see the hundreds and hundreds of bouquets of flowers laid on the ground by mourners, because what's needed outside Buckingham Palace, we've seen these scenes of the processions, the cars coming in and out. Princess Diana, when she died, she was not a working royal. There was no precedent for a funeral for a former member of the royal family. And at first there was talks about how actually the Spencer family wanted to give her a private funeral at the Althorpe estate, at the Spencer family home. But actually there was such an outcry from the public that they then made it a public funeral. So what we're seeing here is there's a different sort of organization that has taken place. But it's what you said, we're just seeing crowds everywhere we're going. We're seeing crowds in London lining this processional route that Her Majesty the Queen's coffin is going to drive down to make her way to her final resting place at Windsor Castle, at the Royal Vault underneath St George's Chapel.
Yeah, of course, you can see just some of the flowers that are being thrown there from the crowd. I always think that's just such a cool moment. But we're being joined right now by Live Now's own Josh Breslow as well. And Josh, I just want your thoughts. We didn't get to speak to you in the media aftermath after the funeral wrapped up. But some of the moments for me, I mean, the bagpipes at the very, very end, they really got me. Also at the very beginning, the gun carriage making its way into Westminster Abbey, I thought was really one of the most emotional and poignant moments so far that we have seen today. Your thoughts? What are your impressions?
I mean, I would say it was almost unbelievable to actually watch that. And I mean, I've never seen anything like it. And a lot of the people who are watching this is the only monarch they have ever known. So it makes it a little bit, more emotional when you are talking about someone who was looked upon by so many different people. We know based on the numbers here that a lot of people, thousands upon thousands, possibly millions, are watching this funeral. So people have a vested interest, and to me, obviously watching it, there was just a lot of different emotional moments. One thing that stuck with me is when Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, delivered that sermon and said, quote, "Few leaders receive the outpouring of love we have seen." It just shows how much support they have received, not just from within the United Kingdom, but people, let's say, here in the U.S., as well as other countries all over the world. And like you were mentioning a bit earlier, it appeared to almost be like a gathering of the UN, because so many different world leaders have turned out to show their support. And one thing I did want to mention, Josh Rom was just talking about this a bit earlier, but some of the shows of support, you did have people leaving various gifts, talking about flowers, stuffed animals, things of that nature. And something I found interesting, we all know during the Queen's Jubilee that there was that commercial that had Paddington Bear and the Queen discussing essentially marmalade sandwiches, and the government actually had to put out that warning to say, please stop leaving marmalade sandwiches over at the memorials because, they're going to go bad. And they essentially issued a warning to all of the people around the world who were coming to the area. They also didn't want any more Paddington Bears, and you actually saw a lot of the people who were greeting King Charles III on Saturday, I believe it was, when he and William went out to the crowd and shook hands and hugged people that had those Paddington Bears in hand. So it's just a very interesting situation and something that we haven't seen pretty much ever, I would say.
Yeah, I just, for those who are on the West Coast or on the East Coast and did not wake up to watch this, let's just dive into some more of the details with the funeral itself and the ceremony itself. I was struck as well by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Welby's, sermon essentially saying that, death is the great equalizer, no matter how much you do in life, like Queen Elizabeth II did. You, at the end of it, you go unto God. And so I thought that was so poignant, a very indicative and a demonstrative of the Protestant faith, to which the Queen was the defender of the faith, obviously one of her titles for so long, for 70 years. And then, of course, you had other faith leaders as well. You had the Catholic Archbishop there, Nichols, at Westminster Abbey as well. So you saw so many facets, so many personages in the British government, in the British kind of church hierarchy, who were there as well. Josh, Ron?
Yeah. I want to quickly go back to Paddington Bear for a second, if you don't mind. And that's, I want to comment on, remember, the firm, the monarchy, the institution is an ancient institution going back hundreds of years, going back to Edward the Confessor, the Tudor period, the medieval ages, running all the way through. And what the Queen did by taking part in that sketch for her Platinum Jubilee with Paddington Bear, she made this ancient institution relatable to the youngest generation of children in our country. And that's why we're seeing all these little Paddington Bear teddy bears being left outside. And I think that's a real tribute to Her Majesty, the fact that, she can make the monarchy relatable for every single age group, for those who are with her from right at the beginning of her reign, to the people that lived under her father as well, the older generation in this country, right the way through to the youngest kids right now living in Britain today. And I think, that was something that from a cultural perspective, that was humongous. But yeah, I think that funeral service as a whole was so poignant. But the Queen being called the defender of the faith, it's not just her defense of the customs of the Church of England, in which she is the head. She's the head of the church, or she was the head of the Church of England. But defender of the faith also is the defending of freedom of faith, of freedom of religion in our country. And what we also saw today, we saw representatives of all different religions represented in that service. We saw Hindus, we saw Sikhs, we saw Muslim representation, Jewish representation. We saw the chief rabbi there and a representative from the Jewish Board of Deputies, all at various points in the ceremony as well. We saw different representatives of all the different churches, the Church of Northern Ireland, the Church of Scotland, the Church of Wales, and the Church of England as well. So the Queen as defender of faith is not just head of the Church of England, it's also the defender of freedom of faith, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of worship in the United Kingdom.
You know, Josh, let's get back to members of the royal family. And really, we saw them for a sustained period today. We don't get to do that a lot. We saw some more, I guess, lesser known or more obscure members of the royal family that we don't get to see as well. How do you think they held up? How do you think they did? Anything, you know, stick out to you, mannerisms, interactions, what have you, because they were all gathered there today on this very, very sad day, but, and they themselves probably don't see each other that often as well.
Yeah, probably. I mean, some of them do live in Kensington Palace in this sort of bubble, and actually that's partially why the Prince and Princess of the now Prince and Princess of Wales wanted to move over to Great Windsor Park, was to give their children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, a more normal upbringing, so to speak. So, you know, but I think what's very noticeable, we saw Prince Harry and Meghan Markle front and center. We saw them very much included in the procession. I know there was a lot of rumor about how much they would be included, and there were a lot of reports that that Meghan Markle was going to travel separately and not part of the procession. And I said at the time, I was skeptical of that, because I know from previous processions, the male members of the royal family walked behind the coffin on foot, whilst other female members of the royal family traveled by car. And we did see that with the Queen Consort, we saw that with the Princess of Wales, and we saw that with Prince George and Princess Charlotte as well. They arrived, they didn't walk behind the coffin, so to speak. They arrived at Westminster Abbey via car. The only female member of the royal family to walk behind the Queen's, to walk in the procession, was the Queen's daughter, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. She was the only female member of the royal family to walk directly behind the coffin. The rest of the royal family would travel to Westminster Abbey in the car. I think throughout this whole mourning period, we've seen all different sorts of reactions. You know, poor Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, she, I think, is going forward. I've always said this to a lot of my fellow royal commentators, and they've all agreed with me. She is the monarchy's secret, or now not so secret, weapon. She's so relatable. You know, back when Prince Philip sadly passed away, her utter commitment to be there for the Queen in understated duty, to not necessarily be centre of attention, but to be there as a constant and just serve the monarchy with no complaints, no explanations whatsoever, was absolutely admirable. And we've seen it whenever she's done walkabouts, whenever she's gone out to greet mourners and view tributes. You could see on her face just how deeply this sad passing has affected her. And we see just through her actions her utter devotion to the monarchy. We also saw today Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, and may I say, I mean, I don't want to go too into outfits and fashion because this is a very solemn occasion, but they did look absolutely terrific today. And I know a lot of journalists and commentators that I've been speaking to via phone have also been agreeing with me. They think they both have done absolutely splendidly. Their statement over the last couple of days has also been some of the most personal words as well, from Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Incredibly personal words coming from them, some of the most touching statements. So I think the royal family, what we have seen from the last week, the last 10 days, is a real show of unity. There have been reports of tensions behind the scenes between Prince Harry, particularly, and his brother, Prince William. But we have seen Prince Harry hold vigil with the other 7 of the Queen's grandchildren in Westminster Hall, wearing military uniform. Meghan Markle, and also Prince Andrew have very much been included in the commemorations, in all of the services. Yes, they haven't always been wearing uniform, as they're not now senior working members of the royal family, but they have been included. We've seen also Princess Anne You know, she has always been known as one of the hardest working royals. You know, in 2021, she undertook over 200 royal engagements. And by comparison, the Princess of Wales undertook 100 royal engagements,
Wow.
over 100 royal engagements in 2021. And I'm not saying that the then Princess of Wales isn't hardworking. She absolutely is. It's more of a testament to the extraordinary work of Princess Anne, undertaking as much engagement as she does. Any sort of engagement that she can fit in, she can. And also, you saw it in the motorcade on that 6-hour journey from Aberdeen, from Balmoral to the Scottish capital, Edinburgh. You saw the grief etched on her face. And then as the coffin entered Holyrood House, you saw the understated emotion on her face. But then at the same time, you saw her give that curtsy. Again, emphasis on the carrying on of tradition, that stoicism, that pillar of strength in which the monarchy is known to be. So what you're seeing from all members of the royal family, you're seeing real human emotion and real grief as they grieve the loss of their mother, their grandmother, their great-grandmother, and the rest of the royal family, their aunt, their great-aunt. But you're seeing that same sense of duty, that same devotion to the country, and the same kind of continuation of tradition, of pomp, of circumstance, of ceremony that the monarchy is also known for.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to look too much into this. Maybe there's nothing there, but something circulated on social media is of note that Prince Harry was seated in the second row at the Abbey for the funeral service. What are we to make of that?
Yes, but also he was sat next to Princess Beatrice as well, and they're known to be very close. Obviously, the princes are known to have a slightly frosty relationship behind the scenes. I think all of this would have been planned out. You know, Prince Harry, he's not, and Meghan, they're not senior members of the royal family, senior working members of the royal family, I should state. So even though Prince Andrew isn't a senior member of the royal family, he is still a direct descendant of Her Majesty the Queen. He is still one of her children, whereas Prince Harry is a grandchild of the Queen. So maybe because, combined with the fact that he's no longer a senior working member, combined with there are other people technically that do take precedence as well, combined with these reported frosty relationships, that's why I think you saw the seating arrangement as it was.
Okay, we want to bring Josh Breslow with Live Now back into the conversation as well as we watch all of the mourners who are going to be out of this 800 attend the service there at Windsor Castle at St. George's Chapel. And then, of course, we've been seeing the hearse make its way to Windsor Castle as well. But you can see some of the people who have been seated and who have gathered there. They got the invite today. This is kind of a condensed version of the 2,000 mourners and dignitaries we saw earlier today at Westminster Abbey. Josh, what are you monitoring right now? What are you looking at?
I'm keeping an eye on all social media as we see things kind of pop up there and people making their comments. You're hearing a lot of people talk about, you know, what a beautiful service it was. As we've said time and time again, there's really no word to use to describe what a beautiful service it was. And watching these images that we've seen over the past, I would say, few minutes or so, where we've seen just so many people lining the street, thousands upon thousands of people everywhere they've gone so far. You see all of those people. You have to think about, honestly, a final count and how many people are there, but it really speaks to how people in the United Kingdom and across the world really felt about the Queen. You look at this image here and you can see they obviously care because there are just so many people, and you're not just talking about one side of the road, you're talking about both different sides as this motorcade goes by. And the hearse driving there, Andrew, you mentioned this a bit earlier, but it does kind of evoke some emotion when you see the people who are there throwing the flowers at that hearse, knowing, you know, the Queen is in that coffin. This is the final time they are going to see her, the final time, of course, that they will see the coffin. So as those flowers are thrown at the hearse, it definitely evokes emotion, is the only way I could think to describe it. And watching the procession that took place a bit earlier from Westminster Hall over to Westminster Abbey, when you saw 142 Royal Navy sailors drawing that gun carriage that carried the coffin, it was emotional. And then you factor in Prince William and Prince Harry, King Charles III, walking behind the coffin, the bagpipers playing, as those people are lining the streets of London and watching this happen. Some of them actually, we did learn, camped out there outside to get a good view of that actual coffin. And Gabrielle, when she was on here a bit earlier, did mention this, but the bell tolling 96 times once per minute for every year of the Queen's life, hearing that, it just, I know I keep saying evokes some emotion, but honestly, this is just such a historic situation that it is hard to find the correct words to describe what we are witnessing here. Yes, it's history and it's somber, but it's just something, I don't know. Andrew, maybe you have a better word to describe it.
I mean, historic, it's been so overused, but I think it's because we have not seen something like this for 70 years. The Queen has been such a mainstay in so many's lives, really a ubiquitous presence. I was talking with Josh Rahm that essentially, and we were talking with Fox's Amy Kellogg the night the Queen died, and to which she described it almost to people chalking this up to her having a supernatural aura and presence that they just never thought the death of the Queen would come to pass. Of course, that is fanciful and absurd on its face because she was 96 years old, but just that staying power, that I guess you would say supernatural grace almost. But of course, this is the culmination of all of that as we approach ever nearer to Windsor Castle. And to what Josh Rahm was saying, it was about an hour away, but they are going quite slow in the caravan. I think you mentioned about 12 miles per hour. We've been seeing the London police kind of keep watch. We've been seeing the flowers being thrown onto the hearse itself, as so many are going to be getting a final glimpse to pay their final respects to the Queen. It also evokes, Josh Rahm, the 4 days that the Queen was lying in state, where who knows how many millions came out to pay their respects, waiting in lines that were upwards of 4 to 5 miles long, that were 24 hours wait time. You waited in that line. We spoke to Lauren Blanchard. She waited in that line. Celebrities like David Beckham, the soccer star, waited in that line with everyone else. What was the sense there? Was there a camaraderie? Was there a kinship? Was there a unspoken sense of togetherness and unity?
Absolutely. That's exactly what there was. There was camaraderie. There was a sense of unity, because you have thousands of people, both in front, behind you, and those that are also beside you, all there for the one same purpose, and that is to queue up to pay your last respects to Her Majesty the Queen. And it was, I will say, the queue was not just, it didn't just epitomize everything that was British. The British love a good queue. It's well known on social media. There's a very good thread describing the queue and just how British it is. But you're queuing up to pay your respects to the firm, the monarchy, the institution, and the greatest Brit of them all, and that is Her Majesty the Queen. So, and everyone was there for the same purpose. The mood in the queue the whole way through. I was there for 10 and a half hours, I queued, which compared to a lot of people is a very good time. I was there for a shorter period. Then, as you said, footballer David Beckham, he was there for 13 hours. There are some people towards the beginning that queued for 5 hours, 6 hours. Television host in the UK, Susanna Reid, who hosts one of the breakfast TV shows over here, she queued for 7 hours. But it just showed the it did epitomize the absolute love and devotion that the people had for Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. She was pretty much universally adored by the people, and that's why people spent so much time queuing for hours, overnight at some point, some for even up to 24 hours. This was a 5 mile long queue to pay their respects, and it represented, the queue in itself, I would say, represented the best of Britain. It represented the grit of Brits that would stand there and queue up for that long, hours on end, a sustained period of time for the greatest Brit of all.
You know, Josh, I want to get your opinion because Josh Breslow and I have been covering this from across the pond, the American angle of all of this, and there's a distinct, fascination and kind of, ardor for the royals, for the British monarchy, and we have seen that, time and time again. Obviously, we do not have a constitutional monarchy here stateside, but give us a sense, how do you think the media in the UK has covered this? Do you think they've been fair? Do you think they've been objective? Do you think they've been, maybe too honorific, too adoring? What do you make of this?
Well, I think the job of the media at this time, particularly the newspapers, is to capture the mood of the nation. I think there has always been a protocol that the broadcasters have had to stick to for years that has been put in place. It's called obit, and that's short for obituary. And there is that protocol. You will see broadcasters wearing only black, grey or navy suits with black ties. You've seen me on camera earlier. For those who are watching the pictures right now of Windsor Castle who can't see me, I'm wearing a black suit jacket and a black tie. And that is kind of the protocol in the United Kingdom. The broadcasters are sticking very closely to that. In terms of how the papers have been treating this, it's their job to kind of capture the mood of the nation. And, they've had page upon page spreads of this over the past couple of days, over the past 10 days even. But that is exactly what the country has wanted to have read. That is the spirit of this country. Her Majesty the Queen, as I said before, is universally loved. This is a real loss for our country. People are very much reeling for this loss. It is profound. It has affected people across our country, in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, in all different ways. And so the historic, I know this word is the buzzword of the moment, but this truly is a historic moment of huge magnitude, and that cannot be overstated. And the public do feel that, and the public, they want to be a part of that. And that's what we're seeing here. That's what we saw by the queues, by the crowds outside Buckingham Palace, by the crowds outside Windsor, by the flowers laid outside Sandringham, by the flowers laid out of Balmoral, from the queues in Scotland. Everything that we've seen over the past 10 days has been true. It has been a real outpouring of grief and of emotion by this country for a monarch in which they have and we have loved so much. The one thing that I would say there has been still to this day an underlying criticism of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle and the way they're acting and the rumours and of the tensions behind the scenes. And, there have been some commentators who are well-known Harry and Meghan critics, but have restrained from that because we want to see unity. And actually, when we saw the Fab Four, as they used to be known, do their 40-minute walkabout outside Windsor, everybody loved that moment. The country loved that moment. The papers celebrated that moment. And I think there is a slight battle between two types of commentators. The ones who are still criticizing Harry and Meghan to this day and are still holding them account for their behavior even now. And then there are the commentators who go, no, but they are actually, at the end of the day, Prince Harry was known to be very close with his grandmother. They still phoned very regularly, even when he was in America. We saw the advert back in 2016 of the Invictus Games when you had Michelle Obama and Barack Obama being like, are you ready? And you had Her Majesty the Queen going, oh, please, really? And Prince Harry going to the camera, boom. You know, once again, the Queen showing her wicked sense of humour, but it showed how close the Queen and Prince Harry were. So they were known to be close. So you have commentators going, you know what, we're going to refrain from that usual coverage, especially a day like today when this is, at the end of the day, yes, the firm, the monarchy, the institution, this is still a family in mourning.
Yeah, and we've just been seeing the aerial pictures of the thousands out there on what is called, I believe, the Long Mile, you've been saying, up to Windsor Castle. You know, Josh Breslow, Josh Rahm, let's talk about the people who pulled this off, who made this happen. They're not members of the royal family, and you've been hearing stories about who these people are, who is driving the hearse, several of the military members who hoisted and carried the Queen's coffin for so many of these days. You're hearing stories about them. We're also hearing, this is from the Associated Press, that the last member of the public to view the Queen's coffin as it lay in state was Chrissy Heery, a serving member of the Royal Air Force. She told the Associated Press the experience was one of the highlights of my life. Now, that is a cool story. Do we know any other of these really interesting, kind of localized stories about everyday Britons who are somewhat a part of this in the execution of it and the planning of it and what have you?
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about the officer who led the procession from Westminster Hall over to Westminster Abbey. That was led by a guy called Steve Elliott, who is a staff weapon engineer officer, I believe, in the Royal Navy. And believe it or not, after this was one of his last duties before he retires. So I think that is a real testament. Again, another incredible story. Your last duty that you're undertaking as part of your service to one of the armed forces branches of this country, especially because the members of the armed forces at the beginning, they have to swear allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen. It's still called Her Majesty's Armed Forces. It's the Royal Army, the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force. There's a reason why it's called the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. The Queen was, or the monarch is, the commander-in-chief of our armed forces. Yes, our Prime Minister takes wartime decisions and all of that stuff and leads our country, but at the same time, they have to get the sign-off for any sort of action from the monarch. If we are going to, if our country was to declare war on another country, the monarch would have to be notified and would have to give their permission and would have to sign that action off. So it's a real testament. So Steve Elliott, before he's the staff weapon engineer officer at the Royal Navy, leading that procession, and one of his last duties was to lead the procession for the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen. I think that's so poignant. And one other thing as well, I want to talk about all the soldiers that were present. You know, they are not actually ordered to be there. It is entirely volunteer only. And you have soldiers from all different ranks of the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, all being representative. Especially you saw at Wellington Arch, you saw all different uniforms. I saw Air Force uniforms, I saw Army uniforms, I saw Navy uniforms. All branches were represented here today at the funeral, and all of them volunteer only.
Okay, I want to bring us all on camera here just so we can kind of reset here for the viewer. But I'm Andrew Kraft, and we want to thank everyone for being with us here on what's been truly a historic day there in the UK, as so many thousands, so many millions are paying their final respects, are saying a last goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II. I'm being joined right now by Live Now's own Josh Breslow there in our Orlando, Florida studios, and of course Josh Rahm, who is in London as well. And he follows all things the royal family, British commentator and journalist, and we appreciate your insight into all of this. We're coming up on the 10 o'clock hour in the very early morning East Coast time here. We're coming up as well, correct me if I'm wrong, on the 3 o'clock hour there in London as the march, the procession, the caravan to Windsor Castle is ongoing as we speak, and the thousands have lined there the Royal Mile. But we are hopefully going to be playing some of the highlights from the funeral a little bit later on, just so you can see, maybe not the whole thing, but some of the key moments. And then again, the march through all of the destinations there in London. You saw it firsthand there, Buckingham Palace, outside the Wellington Arch, outside, Royal Albert Hall, and so many of these iconic London destinations, and then this will all culminate in the chapel service at St. George's Chapel on Windsor Castle, and so that's going to approximately begin in about an hour and 15 minutes time. People are kind of still filing in, taking their seats. But it has been quite a day so far. Josh Breslow, your thoughts, what are you monitoring at this hour? I know you're kind of keeping tabs on social media, but we still have these aerial pictures of the procession going to Windsor Castle.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye, honestly, on those images, watching as all of this is playing out. Honestly, just watching the fact that those people are still lining the streets everywhere they go. It's just kind of never ending. I say that, and then you pull up the image and you can see that there's not people right there, but I guarantee in just a few seconds they'll reach another area where more people are lining the streets to show their support. It's just overwhelming support that we are seeing all over the United Kingdom and across the world. There you go right there. Off to the left side of your screen, you see more people on the side of the road there. One thing that stood out to me, I would say, is that over the last few days, honestly, I would say a week and a half since the passing of Queen Elizabeth, we have seen several unannounced visits by King Charles III to greet the public out there and seemingly meet his people. Over the weekend, most recently, he was joined by Prince William in greeting thousands of people who were waiting in line near Lambeth Bridge. We have talked about just how many people did show up to that line, just waiting there, waiting in some cases 24 hours, a full day, just to have a few seconds to walk up to the Queen's coffin, bow down, blow a kiss, something of that nature, just a few seconds, and then walk out. They were waiting quite a while there, but we did see Prince William and King Charles shake the hands with the mourners and, thank them for coming out. You could see people actually in the video that we had pushing against barriers, just trying to get closer to the king. So my question here for Josh Rahm is, how significant is it that we are seeing this new king who, he made public appearances in the past, but now he is the king and is making more and more unannounced visits to meet his people. What is your thoughts on that? What is the significance of it?
I think it's an incredible significance. All throughout this time, we've seen him struggle with his grief in terms of, we've seen at times, at various points during some of these services, during some of these processions, we've seen the expression, we've seen the grief properly etched on his face, but also at the same time, we know that when he was Prince of Wales, Prince Charles loved to interact with the public. And what we're seeing by these unannounced visits, we're seeing the King Charles, we're seeing him really, he wants to keep that chemistry, so to speak, with the public. He wants to keep up, not that appearance, but he wants to be there for the public in the time of mourning. And, we've seen him respond to the crowds very well. And actually, some of the more upbeat moments that we've seen Prince Charles have over the past 10 days is when we've seen him greet all the crowds. We've seen him, he's all smiles, he's laughing, he's joking. There was one video that circulated around social media that and one member of the public said, "Charles, when are we going for a beer?" And then the king said, "Where?" And that was a real light-hearted moment, and everyone was laughing. He loves interacting with the public. We also saw just on Saturday and Sunday, they make unannounced visits to members of who were queuing up to see Her Majesty lying in state. And both King Charles and Prince William said it means a lot that you're here. Some of their favorite moments are when they interact with the public. And it's also very important because they do serve the public as well. That, the public taxpayer supports the monarchy. So it's very important that they're seen to also be interacting with their public. And it's great to see that the public are loving interacting with the new king. We are, as a country, I think, we're supporting the king. We're rooting him on. We want to see him be the amazing king that he has had and he's always had the potential to be.
And Josh, with that, the hope that, he does keep the legacy of his mother, that he, has his own kind of stature and gravitas, bringing that to the monarchy itself. But it is safe to say he's not as popular as Queen Elizabeth.
But but the thing is, that shouldn't be a negative reflection on King Charles necessarily. It's more of a positive reflection of how universally loved Queen Elizabeth has been. And let's not forget as well, for the 70 years when she was on the throne, she hasn't been allowed to give a political opinion whatsoever. As with Charles, the king, when he was Prince of Wales, he was very politically active. We know that he wrote to politicians. We know that obviously it's well documented his efforts for conservationism and his efforts to combat climate change. Some people view that as a political standpoint. But in his first address as king that was televised, he told the entire country that he said some of the causes in which he took up as Prince of Wales, he will now be stepping back from, and that's due to the role of being monarch. So we know for a fact that King Charles is very much taking this role seriously. And over time, it's still very much the early stages. We're only, 10 days, 11 days into his reign. So the point is, he will build a legacy as he goes on. We will see the sort of king that he will become. But his lack of popularity compared to Her Majesty the Queen isn't a negative reflection on him, because he is still very popular amongst us, amongst the country. It just screams about how universally loved Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, was.
Sure, maybe an unfair comparison there, obviously. But as we are approaching the top of the hour here, it's almost 10 o'clock on the East Coast, almost 3 p.m. there in near Windsor Castle, I should say. But it does look like the procession and the hearse is getting ever closer until the top of the hour, and we're going to keep Josh for one more hour, hopefully, if he has the time. But we also just kind of want to see the sights and the sounds as well. We haven't kind of just paused to listen in, so let's just do that for about the next 6 or 7 minutes here until we hit the top of the hour. We watch people take their seats at St. George's Chapel, and we also watch the hearse arrive to Windsor Castle for what's going to be known as this committal service that's going to be taking place there as well. Let's listen in. Okay, just a gorgeous zoomed out look there at Windsor Castle as the hearse, the processional, makes its final approach. Here at Live Now from Fox, we're going to take really our first commercial break in about 5 hours' time, as we've been giving you every step of the way of this really monumental occasion in British history and British politics and so much more. We want to thank you for being with us. I'm Andrew Kraft. We will be back in 2 minutes with more coverage as we say goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II. Ram, to you, I was mentioning as well, and maybe some of our viewers didn't know how many residences the Queen had, but there were a lot, and we saw a lot of them throughout the course of the last week.
Apologies, my microphone was muted.
Of course.
Yes, so we have seen a lot of the Queen's residences within the last week. She obviously sadly passed away at Balmoral, which is her holiday residence in Scotland, although she did undertake one last constitutional duty there, and that was welcoming the incoming Prime Minister Liz Truss and say goodbye to the outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So that took place in Balmoral. We've seen the Duke, I would say the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, but the Prince and Princess of Wales look at tribute outside Sandringham House, which is another royal residence located in the east of England near Norwich. That was where the Queen would often go in the summer. We know Prince Philip, when he originally stepped back from royal duties, that was where he actually went to retire, and he spent all of his time, or a lot of his time, in Sandringham, whilst Her Majesty the Queen stayed to work in Windsor and Buckingham Palace. Then there's, of course, Buckingham Palace, which is the main royal residence in the centre of London near Green Park, St James's Park and Hyde Park. It's beautiful, surrounded by the parks, but currently undergoing a renovation with some of its infrastructure there, and that is the main residence, the official residence of the monarch, where a lot of duties are carried out. The monarch would travel from Buckingham Palace to go to the state opening of Parliament every year. And then, of course, there's Windsor Castle, where Her Majesty the Queen is travelling to as we speak. We're seeing pictures of the state hearse carrying the coffin. We see some of the flowers adorned on that on the bonnet of the hearse from mourners who have thrown those flowers onto the hearse, travelling at 12 miles an hour to Windsor Castle. This will be the Queen's final resting place, and Windsor Castle is also where the Queen mostly classed as her home during the early stages of World War II, when she was just a young child, before she served as a mechanic in the military, and is one of the only monarchs to, or at least the only female monarch to ever do so. Before that, she and her sister Princess Margaret were evacuated to Windsor Park, to the Windsor estate, and the Queen is very much known to use Buckingham Palace as an office, but considered Windsor Castle her home.
Yeah, of course, and look at that. That is just a stunning vantage point there of the Long Mile going into Windsor Castle, and so many who have lined up. You know, I'm always interested because I know there was quite a long wait. You had to really get there early for the crowds outside of Buckingham Palace on the route today after the funeral was done. And there you can see here. Looks like our shot froze, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, we can see. I believe it. This is the state hearse arriving in Windsor. We see the bearskin soldiers, the Yeoman Guards, lined up beside the state hearse, and we see the aerial shot over Windsor Castle, over Windsor the town, which, can I just say, is one of the most beautiful towns in England, by the way, not just because of its royal patronage and royal meaning and the beautiful landmark of Windsor Castle, but it is just a beautiful town anyway. But we're seeing the bearskin guards line up beside the hearse, and we're about to see the state hearse carrying the Queen's coffin, which on top has the orb, the scepter, and the imperial state crown on top of it, enter Windsor, ready for the committal service starting at 4 p.m. And then afterwards, later on, the royals are going to have their own private service later on tonight, which will not be televised.
Yeah, we're going to listen into some of the sounds and just watch. You know, Josh, Ram, do you think in the future, you know, tourists, Britons and the like, will be able to visit the final resting place of Queen Elizabeth, of Prince Philip together? Do you foresee that?
Well, I don't foresee any access being given to the Royal Vault itself, and there is, as far as I'm aware, no current access even before Operation London Bridge, as this whole operation over the last 11 days has been called. Even pre-London Bridge, there was no access given to the Royal Vault. However, there is access. The public can access St George's Chapel, where all of these ceremonies and services have taken place. You know, I remember going inside of St George's Chapel 3 days before the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Even days beforehand, when there are preparations taking place, the public could still see these landmarks. We do know that for a certain period of the year, the state apartments at Buckingham Palace are open to the public. It's the same with Windsor Castle as well. Members of the public have visited Balmoral and Sandringham before. So these royal residences have been sporadic sporadically opened up, but I do doubt, I very much highly doubt, that the royal vault underneath St George's Chapel itself, the final resting place of the Queen's father, King George VI, as well as Her Majesty the Queen Mother, as well as Princess Margaret, and what will be the resting place of Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, as well as her husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. I doubt the public will be able to see that and will get access to see that.
Okay, Josh Rahm, thank you so much. Josh Breslow is still standing by, but before we bring both of them in yet again, we just want to listen in because it does look like this is really the final stretch of the processional that's going to be entering into the grounds of Windsor Castle, and then the committal service will take place. Let's watch, let's listen. Okay, this is Andrew Kraft back here. We're watching some of the dignitaries step in and arrive to St. George's Chapel there. Of course, former Prime Minister Tony Blair. We've seen all of the former living prime ministers gathered in one place, and we've seen, which is really just phenomenal, members of royal families from all over Europe, from all over the Middle East, from Asia. It's been quite something. I know Josh Breslow and I have been harping back to the point that the UN General Assembly is next week, but this is somewhat of a preview of that, with this many world leaders all together in unison in one place. The power that is concentrated in London today. Well, we do know President Biden is on his way back with the First Lady to the United States. We're being told he's going to touch down back in D.C. at Joint Base Andrews around 5 p.m. Eastern time. So he left pretty quickly right after the funeral service itself, representing the United States of America, the American delegation, just those two. Well, just the President and the First Lady. It's as high as you can get, really. But right now, we can see inside St. George's Chapel, we've been seeing members of the royal family as well. And so they will no doubt take their seats very, very soon here. So this is definitely going to be more intimate. I know there's 800 people attending, but the space itself is more intimate, of course, than the expansive, sprawling Westminster Abbey. Josh Breslow, what do we have in store for the next hour?
I mean, right now it's just going to be a lot of, us watching this video here as this whole situation plays out. It's going to look a lot like this, and then we will see everyone come together. As you said, it's going to be a little bit more intimate than what we saw really earlier on this morning with the funeral. It's a little more, I don't know, I don't want to say delicate, because obviously a funeral is delicate, but it really is just a more intimate situation, and that's what we're going to be watching. I believe it is set to start at around 11 o'clock this morning Eastern time, which would be about 8 o'clock if you are joining us over on the West Coast where you are located. But yeah, I mean, right now we're just going to watch this service continue. There's going to be that music that you can hear there in the background, and the coffin will be escorted over there to Windsor Castle, and we will actually see that ceremony being held.
Yeah, and Josh Rahm, I want to bring you back in, of course, now that we are in this new hour, as the hearse is processing in very, very slowly to Windsor Castle. And so right now we do want to, and I want to pose this question to you. What is tomorrow going to look like? I know that it's kind of somewhat of hypothetical, theoretical as well, but when the people go home and the crowds disperse, and the royal family still personally grieving the loss of their mother, of their grandmother, but the country gets on. Keep calm and carry on. That was, of course, a very popular slogan during World War II. But the Queen adopted it herself, and she would want that. That's what you were saying to us a couple hours ago.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what Her Majesty the Queen would want, especially as this country is in the throes of a cost of living crisis, of an energy crisis. Her Majesty would want this to carry on, would want the country to carry on running. That is the duty of the monarchy, and she would want to see the continuation of the constitutional monarchy, and of the parliamentary democracy. Now, what we're seeing the steps of St. George's Chapel now. We see the bearskin guards lined up all around the chapel, all around the green there. We're seeing the members of the congregation, the 800 who are in St. George's Chapel, rise to their seats as the royal family and the hearse, the state hearse, arrives in Windsor at the moment. That's the thing with what's coming tomorrow, is the country will carry on. The monarchy, the royal family will carry on with their private mourning, but I would presume that Prince Charles will have he'll have to continue on his duties as he has been doing during this period. Last night at Buckingham Palace, they hosted a state reception for all the world leaders and the heads of state in Buckingham Palace. So, you know, that this is the thing. This is a state occasion. We're mourning the loss of a monarch, but also very much an occasion for relations with our neighbors and with the world.
Right.
And the world is mourning this symbol, this unifier.
Yeah. Josh, this is going on right now on the long mile, the long walk, and this is frankly just very, very stunning. And you can see the thousands of people flanked on both sides, and then of course the very slow, the very methodical walk to Windsor Castle. You kind of get a sense now. You can see in this shot how much further they have to go. Give us a sense.
I would like to comment on a few things. So one, the royal hearse is flanked by the bearskin guards of the yeomen. These are the guards that traditionally guard the Buckingham Palace, guard the Queen in ceremonial duties, and also, interestingly, guard the crown jewels when they're stored usually in the Tower of London. Of course, the Imperial State Crown. This is one of the two crowns of a coronation. Also, just quickly, we can see Prime Minister of Canada Justin Trudeau appearing there on the steps of St. George's Chapel, ready to enter in St. George's